When we're going through our healing journey and we hit this place called conscious incompetence, we suddenly become aware of all of the stories and all of the understandings and the reasonings behind why things are the way that they are, why something isn't working for us, and how it could be better. And I really want to encourage you not to get stuck here. It's such an important thing to fully accept things as they are and then choose really strongly to heal it and move on. The healing process doesn't have to take long. The discovery doesn't have to take long. And the moving on is just a vow to do things differently. And if we can follow that process really well, then healing happens absolutely breezily. Join me to find out more. You're listening to the Intuitive Mastery podcast. Hi, I'm kateconnolly, and with over 15 years of intuitive healing and teaching experience, I'm here to help you celebrate intuition and value authenticity to create a world where you have the freedom to live your best life. This podcast is here to teach you how to apply the principles of spirituality, healing, and mindset to have true and lasting joy, all from the inside out. This is the Intuitive Mastery podcast. Hello, everybody, my beautiful spiritual family. I'm excited to be here with you for this episode, and I'm talking to you today about the why me's and what's happening with those questions that we throw ourselves all the time for various different things. If you are interested in my podcast, please subscribe. If you are interested in joining my Intuitive Mastery School, I run an intuitive school every week online where we get to unpack a whole bunch of different spiritual concepts, a whole bunch of different intuitive teachings, and we do them together in a group, in a community, and it's actually a really beautiful energy. We record live channeled meditations every week, so there is loads and loads of resources for you on our Intuitive Mastery School. If you are interested in that, the link is below. I also have a book, The Intuitive Heart Revolution, and a workbook which accompanies it. If you are interested, please check in the links below. So, today I am talking about this concept of why me. Now, this why me is a really big one because when we go into conscious awareness, and I see this in my clinic all the time, and I do have to get super mindful that every time I meet someone, they're doing this probably for the first time, or certainly for the first time with me. And I can be a bit of a spiritual sledgehammer, I've been told, where there's just a lot of truth bombs coming out. And it's not necessarily in a way to hurt anybody. For me, it's just fascinating unpacking people's stories and fascinating unpacking what's actually going on for them and why. And usually the look on people's faces is just so incredibly revealing because it'll kind of go through this series of shock and then this sense of defense and this sense of then denial. And then there'll be this sense of slowly maybe integrating as they go through. And then there's going to be this sense of avoidance. And that pretty much happens a lot for people, unless they've been on this journey for a really long time, which is this journey of consciousness, awareness, and healing. It can be a very confronting thing to have your story basically put in your face and this kind of no ability to kind of see it differently. And it can be really upsetting and it can be very scary because this concept of consciousness, when we become conscious, when we become aware of our story, whatever the story might be, there's always a sense of, oh my goodness, A, that's not true. B, that can't be true. What have I done to deserve this? C, how have I ended up here? Why is this happening to me? We go into this state of, I don't want this to happen. I want to get out of it. This is not what I asked for. And then we go then into this huge element of blame. Who do I blame for this? This level of conscious incompetence, i.e., I know what's wrong, but I don't know how to fix it, is probably one of the most dangerous and disempowering parts of learning how to be spiritual, but also follow your intuition. So when you're revealing or being revealed different aspects of your life that haven't been working. The blame factor is such a massive thing. Like, what am I going to do with this information? I'm going to blame XYZ, my dad, my mom, my grandparents, my ancestral line, my first husband, my second daughter, whoever it is. There's always this sense of victim energy. And I think that's pretty normal because the human mind wants to create accountability around things and it wants to kind of wrap things up in a story so that it makes sense. And very frequently, those stories don't make sense, although I try and make sense for people as much as I can. But I think we kind of go into this massive spiral of self-destructive thoughts and we go into this place of really starting to sabotage ourselves and our healing. And I think that's a really normal thing to happen, but it's also a very unhealthy thing to happen because we can get stuck there. And in our journey of spiritual awakening and in journey of like intuitive understanding of ourselves and of others, standing in a place of blame keeps us in that spiral of not working things out. If we're going to blame anyone or anything, it's because we feel like we're hard done by and something needs to be held accountable. But how about reframing this? How about looking at it from a place of everything has a story and everything has a reason, even if we're not conscious of it? One of my jobs in my clinic is to create the awareness of what their story is and why, and help them to unpack it in a way that is actually really positive for their lives so they can actually step into something more appropriate for them, more positive, something that's actually going in the direction that they want to and not the other way around. Um, so, for example, I had a woman come in just today and we were talking about her experiences in her life. And she was, suffering from anxiety and having a lot of trouble. And she wasn't really sure how she was going to, move into the next phase of her life. And she was blaming it on moving around a lot and traveling a lot. She was blaming it on old relationships with siblings. There was all of these things that she was trying to kind of attribute it to. And in the end, when I tuned in, it was actually her relationship with her husband, who is literally the last person on the planet that she would have thought would create anxiety for her. But when we started unpacking it, it became really apparent as to why there was an anxiety program going on in her. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with a husband. There isn't. He's an amazing person. It also doesn't mean to say there's anything wrong with her. She's an amazing person. They have a great relationship. They are soulmates. It's a beautiful connection. So why is she suffering from anxiety just being around him? So this is when we start unpacking the story. Okay. She has inner child stuff with her parents, and there was a similar patterning with her parents, which is a pretty no-brainer potential because that's often what happens. But they also had past life experiences together where they were playing out different roles with each other and having this unpacking of their relationship over different lifetimes as well. So for those of you that are not familiar with past lives, it's a really amazing part of us that we can utilize in our healings to actually come into a really much more whole healed place in the present moment. So as we were unpacking all of this, it became really aware. It became very apparent, and she became very aware of why she was suffering from this anxiety and what was going on there. So we did a few processes around that, and that really started to help shift her energy around her husband. And it's not to say that she needs to then do anything about that. She doesn't. But if that inner anxiety tends to calm down because we've cleared the story and we've kind of done healing around those elements of her that hasn't stepped into her fullness yet, then there's no reason why can't go from strength to strength to strength and why her anxiety can't go away. But when we first talked about it, her first reaction was, oh my goodness, it's definitely not my husband. We have an amazing relationship and everything's perfect there. And that's a really normal response because why would she think there is when things on a daily basis seem okay? But once we actually started unpacking it, we were realizing and understanding the patternings that were going on. And that doesn't necessarily mean to say then that she needs to go home and have a big discussion with her husband. It doesn't mean that she needs to rethink her marriage. It doesn't mean any of that. It also doesn't mean she's at fault, and it doesn't mean he's at fault. What it simply means is that there is a story and a belief system going on there that is making her feel anxious. And then we need to help heal those elements of self so that are showing up in that story that are making her feel anxious. So when we're looking at the various different elements of self, there's not just me in this body in this moment. I also have galactic elements of self. So I have other parts of me that come from, intergalactic areas. So we're talking about multiple different galaxies, multiple different planets, multiple different species, right? And for most older souls, they've probably been on most planetary systems and they have multiple intergalactic selves. So when we're calling in those various aspects, we will potentially call in some of those. We also have interdimensional energies, which is similar to intergalactic, but I do tend to find that I get different results. So I just call on that. So interdimensional is different dimensional realities. So areas that we've lived that may be seem fantastical. We've dealt with dragons and all sorts of cool stuff, but fantastical different timelines based on an interdimensional experience. So we will call those elements of self if required as well. We will have ancestral patterning. So any patterning that's come down from your ancestors, that can absolutely 100% impact your story and be one of the reasons why that story is unfolding as it is. You can have karmic lessons unfolding with people and relationships, which was what was happening with this woman today, where you may have had past lives with this person and you're playing out karma in different ways so that you can actually heal that relationship. So that's a really big way that that can happen as well. So past lives is an element of that aspect of self that can be called in for healing. And then we've also got our inner child, our inner teenager, our inner adult, basically any age between preconception and now that may come through as something that needs to be healed as well. So when you think about all those thousands of different stories that can unfold because of the different elements of self, is it no wonder that we start to try and apportion blame because it just doesn't make sense, right? Why would me playing karma out with my husband for 3 lifetimes impact my anxiety now? And my answer is dramatically. It dramatically impacts it because who we are in this moment is a sum total of everywhere that we've been and everywhere that we're going and every part in between. And so, if we have an element of ourselves that's struggling in the moment, it's folly, absolute folly to apportion blame anywhere at all because it's not about blame. It is actually 100% about uncovering the story and healing it, healing the element of self that's impacted or the multiple different elements of self that have been impacted by it. And that's where we get really massive shifts for people because it's not enough to go, oh, well, I used to feel a bit anxious around my husband and now I don't. No, no, no. We need to unpack that whole thing. There's a lot of conversation too, I guess, about is it important to unpack the story to heal? Is it actually important to know all of the ins and outs of things that have happened? The answer is no, it's definitely not. But I do think it's really important to have an element of understanding of your belief system and an element of understanding about where your source of anxiety is coming from so that you can heal that part of you. So it's always really a nice activity, I think, to get really curious, to get curious about why you feel a certain way and get curious as to where that might come from. And just don't apportion judgment or blame to it. Just get really curious, get aware, and then choose to heal that part of you that's showing up for you. And that's usually a really balanced way of doing it without trying to get too caught up in where it's coming from and who I need to have that stern conversation with because, they've ruined me on some level. It's just simply not true. If you want to then kind of take it to, experiences where you've had trauma or abuse or something like that, which does happen. It happens a lot and it's very tragic. And there is that level of malevolence that's happening in those experiences. This is not about you inviting that in, and this is never ever your fault. So, this is not about apportioning blame at all in those circumstances for you or the person that's impacted you. 100% not. There is almost always a bigger story at play, especially if that trauma is big and especially if the impact on you is big. So usually when I see that, I'm definitely looking at other dimensional experiences that have impacted what's happening there. I've had a couple that were actually in intergalactic wars and they were in opposing clans. So that was part of that story playing out. I've had people where they've had karma for multiple different lifetimes, where one's been the carer and the other one's been the abuser, and vice versa. There has been lots and lots and lots of different stories playing out for people with multiple different energetic stories that are playing out in that relationship. And typically, in order to heal and either move on or heal and shift that balance in the relationship, we need to have an understanding as to why. And that's where it can get really interesting and important. And that's not to say every person needs to go and see a healer like me to unravel the story. But I think just being mindful and aware that not all of our issues is something that we need to then blame someone for. It's also not something that we need to get really caught up in the story about. So if I tell someone the energetic story about what's unfolded in their lives, they don't need to then go and mull over that for 6 months and get really upset about it and make a big story about it either, because that's not helpful. The story that I give is just to unfold the awareness so that we can bring in healing and then we can move on directly. It's not about dwelling. It's not about making up more stories. It's not about going into, well, I'm like this because, and this happened because, and I need to do because. That's not actually super helpful. It's to allow that consciously incompetent part of us to be at peace with whatever has unfolded in our lives that we haven't chosen, right? Whether that's a health issue, an anxiety problem, a relationship breakdown, troubles finding a job, whatever it might be. All of that is the story that's unfolding because of other experiences that we've had. And if we can learn how to be really kind to ourselves in our conscious journey as we're learning about ourselves, then the process becomes a lot more easy, because we're not then spending a lot of time self-bashing and going into, oh my goodness, how could I? Or why is it like this? Or whatever else. So let go of blame. Let go of this desire to hold on to a story. Be mindful that everyone's always doing their best. And if you are really struggling with something, be really mindful that that is not going to be the end of the story. There is going to be a bigger, wider, intergalactic element to your story, which is one of the reasons why you're struggling right now. And that doesn't mean that you need to go searching a billion healers. Just get curious about your feelings, get curious about the story, and send healing to that part of yourself. And call in all parts of yourself through all space, time, and dimension. Send them oneness, forgiveness, and love. Oneness, forgiveness, and love. Those three. And keep bringing them through and bringing them through and bringing them through until you feel relief. And then if you can then look back and think about that same situation without that same trigger or response or reaction or blame, then you're definitely heading in the right direction. And that's a really powerful place to be. Always be kind to yourself. Always get curious, and don't dwell in the story. Have an awesome week.